What if the first sign that America was losing its global dominance wasn't a military defeat, an economic collapse, or a failed alliance, but a handshake you didn't even notice? What if the moment that changed everything didn't happen in Washington or Beijing, but in a meeting room in New Delhi, where three leaders quietly redrew the map of global power? What if the next chapter of global history wasn't written by America and its enemies, but by America's friends choosing new friends? Last month, while Americans were focused on domestic politics, something unprecedented happened in the corridors of international diplomacy. Three countries that had fought wars with each other, competed for territory and influence, and represented completely different political systems, Russia, India, and China, came together and began drafting a world order where American approval was no longer mandatory. This isn't about ideology or a military threat. This is about math. With a combined population of 3 billion, controlling vast energy resources, manufacturing capacity, and nuclear arsenals, these three countries see more to gain by cooperating with each other than by competing for American support. Ask yourself, when was the last time America was challenged not by its enemies, but by its friends choosing independence? Welcome to Crisis Zone. Tonight, we're examining the triangular alliance that could shift the global balance of power, even though most Americans aren't aware it exists. The unexpected alliance, when enemies become partners. Here's what most Americans miss about the Russia-India-China triangle. These three nations should be natural rivals, not natural allies. Yet today, they are finding common ground that threatens the foundation of American global influence. According to Reuters and the Financial Times, Russia and China have conducted more joint military exercises in the past 2 years than they did in the previous decade. But here's the game changer: India, considered a strategic U.S. partner meant to counterbalance China, has been participating in these exercises through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Think about this. These countries are vastly different, and China and India have a history of decades-long hostility. The two nations could have even gone to nuclear war years ago, yet now, they are partners. There's a clear goal here: to strip America of its global dominance. The economic numbers tell the story. Russia provides the energy that both China and India desperately need. China offers the manufacturing and technology that Russia and India want access to. India provides a massive consumer market both Russia and China need for economic growth. Together, they are building trade relationships that completely bypass US-dominated financial systems. According to Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal, Russia-China trade reached record levels in 2024 and is increasingly conducted in rubles and yuan. India-Russia energy trade has skyrocketed with rupee-ruble swap mechanisms that cut out Western banking systems. And while China-India border tensions persist, economic cooperation continues to grow despite political friction. This is what strategists call compartmentalization, separating political disputes from economic cooperation. It's the exact opposite of the American foreign policy approach, where economic access is tied to political alignment. The military dimension adds another layer. Through structures like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS, these three nations are coordinating weapons sales, technology transfers, and strategic planning. They aren't forming a formal military alliance like NATO, but they're building military relationships that reduce their reliance on American weapons and approval. Energy, the foundation of the new triangle. Let's follow the trail of oil and gas, because energy flows reveal power dynamics more clearly than diplomatic statements or military parades. Russia has massive energy reserves seeking markets after Western sanctions. China needs huge energy imports to fuel its economy but doesn't want to depend on US-controlled sea lanes. India needs affordable energy for development and refuses to limit its options based on US preferences. According to the US Energy Information Administration and energy industry reports, India has become Russia's second-largest oil customer by purchasing crude at prices well below global market rates. This isn't just about saving money, it's about gaining energy independence from Western-dominated supply chains. India's role completes the triangle. According to Reuters and energy sector publications, India has increased its oil imports from Russia by over 400% since Western sanctions began. while also expanding energy cooperation with China through various regional development projects. When massive energy deals are conducted in rubles, yuan, and rupees, demand for the dollar decreases, weakening America's power to use financial pressure as a foreign policy weapon. And it doesn't stop with energy. Energy independence turns into political independence, and political independence becomes strategic autonomy. Technology and trade, building alternative systems. Now let's examine how the Russia-India-China triangle is building alternative technology and international trade systems that could fundamentally weaken U.S. economic influence. According to the Wall Street Journal and various technology sector reports, China and Russia have accelerated cooperation on semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and space technology since Western sanctions began. But India's participation turns this bilateral partnership into a trilateral tech ecosystem. The result: a technology triangle capable of developing and producing advanced systems without needing American components, software, or approval. According to official statistics and Bloomberg reports, China-Russia trade surpassed $200 billion in 2024, while China-India trade approached $100 billion despite political tensions. India-Russia trade is smaller but growing rapidly in strategic sectors like defense, energy, and pharmaceuticals. But the most important factor isn't current trade volumes, it's the institutional frameworks being built to support future growth. BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and various bilateral trade agreements are creating permanent structures for economic cooperation that don't require U.S. participation or approval. These alternative systems start small but gain momentum through network effects. As more countries use non-dollar payment systems, these networks become attractive to other nations seeking to avoid U.S. financial pressure. As more technology partnerships occur outside U.S.-controlled networks, countries become less dependent on American approval to access advanced technology. Military cooperation, security architecture reshaped. Let's examine the military dimension of the Russia-India-China triangle, because defense cooperation reveals strategic intentions more clearly than economic relations. According to Defense News and various military analysis publications, the frequency and complexity of joint military exercises among these three countries have significantly increased. The Vostok exercises include coordinated operations across multiple domains by Russian, Chinese, and Indian forces. What makes this cooperation strategically important is this: these aren't just training drills. They are developing interoperability between military systems that traditionally don't work together, laying the groundwork for potential joint operations in the future. India's role is particularly significant because it maintains defense relationships with all major powers simultaneously. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, India purchases weapons from Russia, technology from China, and advanced systems from the United States and Europe. This gives India unique insight into American military capabilities while also allowing it to collaborate with America's strategic rivals. The geographical implications are critical for U.S. strategy. Russia dominates the Arctic and Europe's borders. China dominates the Western Pacific and the South China Sea. India controls the Indian Ocean and gateways to the Middle East. Together, these three nations could coordinate across the entire Eurasian landmass and its surrounding waters. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, this coordination complicates American military planning because it creates the possibility of simultaneous challenges on multiple fronts. U.S. forces, designed to handle regional conflicts, could struggle against synchronized pressure in multiple theaters. The nuclear dimension adds another layer of complexity. All three nations possess nuclear weapons, and all are modernizing their arsenals. Even if they don't directly share nuclear technology, their strategic coordination raises the possibility of a coordinated nuclear response to any major U.S. military action, influencing global nuclear stability. America's dilemma: when partners choose independence. Now let's examine America's strategic dilemma, because understanding Washington's limited options explains why this triangle is likely to strengthen rather than weaken. The core problem is that the US cannot apply the same pressure on India that it does on countries like Iran or North Korea. India is the world's largest democracy, a major economic partner, and a critical counterweight to China's regional dominance. Maximum pressure on India would backfire, pushing it closer to China and Russia, exactly the opposite of U.S. strategic goals. According to Politico and various foreign policy publications, U.S. officials have repeatedly voiced concerns about India's deepening ties with Russia and China, but they have found no effective way to influence India's decisions without harming broader American interests. This reveals a fundamental limitation of U.S. strategy. Tools that work against adversaries don't work against partners who choose independence. Economic sanctions hurt U.S. companies dependent on India's market. Military pressure alienates a country essential for Pacific security. Diplomatic pressure drives India toward alternative partners that don't demand special concessions. The calculus with China is equally complex. Confronting China directly risks driving it into deeper cooperation with Russia and India. Yet allowing China to strengthen ties with them increases the risk of a bloc capable of challenging U.S. global dominance. Russia provides a simpler example. The U.S. has already applied maximum pressure through sanctions and diplomatic isolation. Yet instead of forcing Russia to comply with U.S. preferences, this pressure accelerated its cooperation with China and India. Economic impact. What this means for American workers. Let's connect the dots from geopolitical triangles to your paycheck, because these strategic relationships have direct consequences for American communities and workers. Manufacturing jobs in states like Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina face growing competition as the Russia-India-China triangle builds integrated supply chains without U.S. participation. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and various industry reports, U.S. manufacturers increasingly compete with products made using cheaper inputs and coordinated production strategies within this triangle. The tech sector faces different challenges. U.S. technology companies, dominant in global markets for decades, now compete with alternative ecosystems serving 3 billion consumers without relying on U.S. components or approval. Industry publications report that this competition is particularly intense in telecommunications, semiconductor manufacturing, and software development. Energy sector workers face mixed effects. While increased global oil and gas trade outside U.S.-controlled systems may lower energy prices for American consumers, it also reduces demand for U.S. energy exports and related services, diminishing U.S. influence in energy markets. Agricultural exports could face disruptions as the Russia-India-China triangle develops food trade networks that exclude U.S. products. Midwestern farming states, heavily reliant on exports to these markets, could see declining demand and lower prices. States with large immigrant populations from Russia, India, and China are building cultural and economic links shaped by these changes. But the most significant long-term effect may be on U.S. economic confidence and strategic thinking. For 80 years, Americans assumed that global economic integration would happen on U.S. terms, using U.S. systems, with U.S. approval. The Russia-India-China triangle represents the first major challenge to this assumption since World War II. The quiet shift, how change happens gradually. Let's explore how the Russia-India-China triangle represents what we call a quiet transformation, fundamental shifts in global power without dramatic events that grab U.S. attention. Unlike wars or economic collapses, strategic alignment happens through thousands of small decisions, procurement contracts, trade agreements, diplomatic consultations, joint ventures, technology transfers, cultural exchanges. None of these moves seems threatening individually, but together they reshape the balance of global power. Consider the South China Sea, where China is building artificial islands, Russia is increasing its naval presence, and India is expanding maritime cooperation with both countries through bilateral agreements. These aren't temporary deployments. They're permanent changes in the strategic geography of one of the world's most important waterways. The institutional dimension shows similar permanence. Organizations like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization aren't emergency responses to temporary problems. They're alternative international cooperation structures meant to rival US-led institutions like NATO, the G7, and various UN agencies. What this means for America's future. Now let's examine what the Russia-India-China triangle means for America's strategic position and domestic priorities over the next decade. The most immediate takeaway is that the US can no longer assume automatic global leadership. For 30 years after the Cold War, US policymakers could reasonably expect that major international initiatives would succeed with American support and fail without it. That assumption no longer holds when three major powers can coordinate alternative approaches to global challenges. Military spending priorities must also adapt. Traditional power projection capabilities designed for regional wars may be less relevant than capabilities built for continuous competition with peer rivals coordinating their actions. Immigration policies must consider that skilled workers from Russia, India, and China may find attractive alternatives in their own countries as their economies grow and deepen cooperation with each other. Energy policies must recognize that the US cannot control global energy markets when major producers and consumers coordinate outside US influence. Climate policies may be limited in effectiveness if major emitters coordinate their approaches independently of US preferences. Regional security arrangements must adapt to the possibility that traditional US allies will hedge their bets by deepening ties with the Russia-India-China triangle. The bottom line: the Russia-India-China triangle is forcing the US to shift from dominance-based strategies to influence-based strategies, to adjust domestic priorities, from education to military spending to economic policy, and to confront assumptions about American global leadership that have shaped domestic politics for 3 decades. Conclusion: a new reality. Here's the conclusion: the Russia-India-China triangle isn't just another diplomatic development. It's the emergence of an alternative power structure that could end the era of US global dominance. This triangle works because it's based on mutual benefit, not ideological alignment. Russia, India, and China don't need to agree on political systems or social values. All they need is consensus that cooperation with each other offers greater benefits than competing for US approval. This transformation matters because if US global dominance fades, it may no longer be able to impose superiority over other nations. That would have negative consequences for both America's economy and its power. Ask yourself this: if America faces constant competition from coordinated peer rivals, would you rather your family, community, and country be prepared for that reality, or blindsided by it? Subscribe to Crisis Zone, turn on notifications, and join this community of Americans tracking strategic developments often overlooked by mainstream media. Tell us in the comments, have you noticed any changes in your community or industry that point to these broader strategic shifts? Because while we can't control what happens in Moscow, Beijing, or New Delhi, we can control how well we understand these changes, and how consciously we prepare for the world they're building. For now, goodbye.